By virtue of experiencing narcissistic abuse, you have limited access to something that can have myriad benefits for your health. Narcissistic abuse plus lack of sleep, it's a cruel catch-22.
Basically, toxic people waste time. So even as I wrote those words on a piece of paper, I thought, oh goodness, that could be a proverb. Toxic people waste time. But it's not a proverb. I like to think of it as sort of a truism. Now, I really want you to close your eyes for a second, and I want you to think about it. I want you to think about how much time you waste on or with difficult, toxic, narcissistic, or other forms of highly demanding, eggshell requiring, constantly victimized people. So how do you spend your time with them? You try and appease them, please them, avoid their rage, cheer them up, fluff them, validate them, admire them, try to avoid saying the wrong thing, manage all of their sensitivities, cut them slack, make excuses, spend hours writing carefully written emails or text messages, sit in meetings, do endless calls, trying to explain things with them so they feel heard. You won't be heard, but they have to be heard. And in the midst of all that is happening in the world, I must say, everyone is really stressed these days, more than I've ever seen. And lots of people opine about what are our greatest sources of stress in the world right now. Loneliness, managing work-life balance, working too much, money, the cost of living, health issues. No, I'm going to argue this, and I'm willing to take the bet that the stressor that is taking the greatest toll on the collective health and mental health of the people in the world is toxic people. I found myself recently talking with someone who is sort of more of like an independent contractor, freelance worker, professional person, and this person is often juggling multiple gigs or jobs or projects. That at the time, the person had about 5 projects they were balancing at the time, and they kind of require equal amounts of attention, and they commented that one of the 5 projects involved a deeply difficult, entitled, grandiose, egocentric person. The person had to be handled and managed all of the time. It required long, circuitous emails just so this person felt heard. And then making sure that they kept telling the egocentric person they were great just so they could keep the project alive. And because this difficult person actually wasn't all that great or wasn't all that smart, everyone was always having to find creative ways of steering their better ideas into a sensible place and not an idiotic place without that person feeling criticized. Because all of this team were this one difficult person's client and paying them for paying this person who's doing the 5 other jobs for their work, they couldn't afford to lose this difficult client. The person I was talking with commented that although I have 5 separate gigs I'm working on right now, I'm putting 80% of my time into this one. Not because the work on this one is harder, but because so much of the effort goes into managing this one person. This difficult person would send multiple long emails a day to the person I was talking with, including weekends, and then would become petulant and tantrumy when they weren't responded to right away. One person on the team actually had to step away from their own child's birthday party to answer this toxic person's emails. But the toxic person was integral to getting the funding, so everyone, including this person I was talking with, had to just keep eggshell walking to get the project done and ultimately to get paid. So 80% of this person's time was going into this one project, and most of it, the work, wasn't even germane to the project. It was managing this difficult person. Toxic people require disproportionate resources. This is often most pronounced in the workplace. I am convinced that these long, meandering, cover-your-ass employee handbooks that people get on the first day of a new job is really nothing more than an assemblage of the various issues that have come up over the years of having to cover every single damn situation raised by difficult narcissistic people who can't follow rules, and thus the employer has to write down the most basic elements of normal human functioning as rules and turn them into rules so that if they need to enforce them, it's in writing. If you have these kinds of toxic, difficult, demanding, high conflict people in the workplace, you will need to document the hell out of everything. And the narcissistic people somehow have a strange part of their psyches that are designed to write long, abusive emails, no matter what the hour. In so many of these workplace situations, the backing and forthing will happen over dozens and dozens of these long emails. Upon receiving one of these ridiculous emails, the healthy person may have a brief response or no response if it's not warranted, because more often than not, these emails are more of a rant than an actual question. The difficult person will actually just go on and on and on. The emails become like a one-sided, increasingly delusional conversation. But these kinds of email or text rants are one more example of the airing of the grievances that are basically Narcissism 101. The emails can be exhausting to the point that for anyone working with that person, as soon as you see the narcissistic person's name in your inbox, you kind of have these gastric paroxysms. You need to run to the toilet again and have severe, intense anxiety. In some ways, this is why difficult people get away with so much in the workplace. They wear people down. And this is why we often see things like financial or legal settlements or even capitulation. And the way labor law is written, it's written in a way that it's all but impossible to fire a narcissistic person. As part of the workplace consulting work I have done, I am struck by how challenging it can be to let someone go on the basis of their toxic workplace behavior, and how at some point many employers, knowing that they can't afford the lawsuit they'd have to get if they tried to fire the person, they'll just try to isolate the difficult team member and give them simple tasks that they can do alone to at least protect the rest of the team from the narcissistic person. All of this ends up becoming a major waste of time and resource and can be demoralizing for the rest of a team. The other way that toxic people waste our time is that we think about them over and over again, day and night, night and day. Rumination is a classical part of narcissistic abuse, and people will ruminate about the difficult conversation they just had, or the difficult emails they got that day, or the difficult situation. The self-gaslighting means that people will wonder, did I actually say or do the things they accuse me of? Like, I didn't think I did. Now, usually the answer is no, but the narcissistic person is so committed to their distorted version of reality that their conviction can actually destabilize everyone else's instincts. People will spend time thinking about this toxic situation, poring over the emails and texts, trying to compose their own lengthy responses to the narcissistic person's verbal diarrhea emails. Please, if you feel the need to sit down and write it, please don't send it, because it's just going to release even more torrents of emails you're not going to be able to keep up. You will spend time talking to people about it, and you will find yourself distracted by it. It is all a major time waster, and people will find themselves getting angrier and angrier, not just about the situation with the toxic person, but about all the time that they're wasting. This wasted time and distraction can actually result in problems at work, problems in your relationship, disrupted sleep, and on top of the toxic situation, you are now also potentially facing the consequence of not getting all the things you need to get done, and taking hits for that because you're so distracted thinking about the toxic situation. When you think about where workplaces will waste the most time, inevitably, it's in dealing with the difficult employee. The HR people and managers who have to keep sitting and having meetings about the situation. the creation of remediation plans for this difficult person, having more meetings, and then going to even more meetings about the employee's grievance or lawsuit, and then lose money when they put the person, the narcissistic person or difficult person, on leave with pay, and then they may still have to pay a settlement. There is the lost time in this. There's the lost time spent thinking about it and talking about it, and the sleepless nights. And I have to be honest with you, in a place like California, labor law actually significantly favors the toxic, narcissistic types of people. The labor laws may have actually come out of a place of good intention to provide employee protections, but sadly have actually resulted in very calculating people with these kinds of high conflict, toxic styles, recognizing that once they're hired, they can get away with a lot because the employment policies favor them. Many employers have lost thousands of dollars or even more trying to get rid of or manage these entitled, high conflict, manipulative employees. Let's face it, in a large corporation, that's a headache, but in a small to medium-sized business, it can actually result in the business taking a substantial hit, if not completely going under. In your personal life, you spent endless hours ruminating, thinking, talking, therapying, and having sleepless nights. You may figure out how to firewall or gray rock or not engage and all the rest of it, as well as try to protect children or other stakeholders from the misery. All of this expends psychological energy, lots of psychological energy. Many people also feel that not only are they wasting real time on the inefficiency of the narcissistic relationship, but they're also wasting what I call lifetime. Years being spent in a miserable relationship or working with a miserable person or wondering if it is better to not be in it or being afraid to consider an alternate path than whatever kind of relationship they are in. That constantly thinking about it is one more time drag. Too often, when I ask people what's good and what's not good in their lives, over half the time, the not good thing is a difficult person or people in their lives. Otherwise, most other things, they're going pretty well for us. The stuff that keeps us up at night is the rumination about the toxic people and situations. I really do believe it may be the single greatest stressor of our time. And the fact is, you can never get that time back. So for reasons that will never be fully clear to me, the enabling nature of our society is such that the structures actually embolden, empower, and enable the most toxic people in a system. They can harass and harangue and abuse and demand and send horrible emails with abandon. But everyone else, walking on eggshells, has to manage this, wait for the processes to work themselves through. And before you know it, it's many times that difficult narcissistic person who's walking off with the settlement while everyone else is still in there punching a clock. And you know what, though? Some people will say, you know what, I'm fine with punching the clock. If they're gone, this has just became a much easier job. But unfortunately, in some of these situations, if the difficult people don't leave the situation, it's really then having to do the calculation. Is this taking, especially in a workplace, such a toll on me? Should I stay or should I go? It's a very personal choice. But at the end of the day, the bottom line and the upthrust of this video is toxic people waste a lot of time. And like I said, it's time that you can't get back.
What am I talking about with bandwidth? When I use the term, you know what I mean, right? If you have internet in your house or something, you know, the wider the bandwidth, the more the bandwidth, the more you, the wider the bandwidth, the more the bandwidth, the better your internet runs. Everything runs faster, everything runs more efficiently. There's actually been some really interesting research done by behavioral economists, namely Shafir and Nathan, who are at Princeton and MIT. Brilliant work on this idea of cognitive bandwidth. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds in that, but they've done that work. They wrote a book called Scarcity. I highly recommend it. This idea of bandwidth, it gets at our mental efficiency. So let me give you a good example. Let's say you stayed up all night for whatever reason, for work, because you were partying, because you couldn't sleep, whatever. How well do you function the next day? My guess for most of you is not very good. You're thinking more slowly. You probably shouldn't even be driving a car. You can't even choose what cereal to have in the morning. Your bandwidth is shot, okay? It's down to here. If that's the reason your bandwidth is shot, guess what? All you need to do is get a good night's sleep, and you'll probably be back to normal the next day. Have your bandwidth be able to do you. But different things can erode at our bandwidth. Fatigue, stress, pressure, lack of resource, lack of time, lack of money, and over the course of a day, it kind of eats us away. But if we were to apply that concept to narcissism, it becomes sort of an interesting thing to muse on. Those of us who spend any time with a narcissist, whether it's our partner, a family member, a boss, a coworker, a friend, anyone, we expend a lot of bandwidth walking on eggshells. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to set them off into a rage. We don't want to turn on the trigger that makes them get upset for no reason we can identify, because remember, narcissists as a rule are hyper sensitive. But when you walk on eggshells, it's exhausting. You have to put so much resource into say, don't say this, don't do that, don't mention this, don't tell them I had this good thing happen, don't let them know we have to fix this mistake. By the time you figure that all out, you have wasted so much mental energy, you don't have it to give someplace else. So this is where being in a relationship with a narcissist in any area of your life can actually bring down your level of performance. Because you're expending so much energy on this, it can affect, for example, your ability to be a parent, because you may be giving it all up to the spouse that you're walking on eggshells around. You may not notice moments in your child's life. If you're walking on eggshells at work a lot, it may really cut into your work performance. The work product you put forth isn't as good. You're not able to work as efficiently. You may end up having to work more hours just to get the job done. If you walk on eggshells around a friend, you may find that what's supposed to be your leisure time with a friend ends up becoming really exhausting. So the time you should be repleting yourself ends up being exactly the time you deplete yourself. If you walk on eggshells around your family, around your parents, or around siblings, it can make your family life not only exhausting, but it can also negatively affect other relationships in your world because you've given up so much bandwidth just to have a conversation with your mother or your father. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in person. It can be on the phone. So as you can see, any one of you out there who's in any form of narcissistic relationship, which I'm guessing is most of you, is probably saying, okay, I didn't realize it was bandwidth. But you're so depleted by the end of the day, more than you normally would be. And maybe if it's your parents, maybe you've always become used to this. But you might say, you know what, in other relationships, I wasn't this depleted. But now I'm exhausted. So what you may find is that by walking on eggshells, you're avoiding their tantrums, you're avoiding their rage, you're avoiding their wrath and their anger and their disappointment and their frustration. So you're dodging those bullets, but you're exhausted. You barely can drag yourself into bed at the end of the day. So again, it's a balancing act of giving up one thing, but then getting another. So maybe you get to keep peace, but you're too exhausted to enjoy it anyhow. Not to mention it can have really negative effects on your life, on your relationships, on your work. It can end up hurting your work performance. In the most extreme cases, you might even lose a job. I've actually worked with a few clients who put so much work into their narcissistic relationship that they didn't have it to give to their jobs, and they became precariously close to losing some really, really good jobs because they were having to do so much damage control on appeasing the narcissist or the narcissists in their life. This phenomenon is real. I actually, again, would love to hear your comments on this. If any of you have ever had this experience of having really depleted bandwidth, or feeling exhausted at the end of the day from having to walk on eggshells, from having to watch and guard every word you say because of the narcissistic person's hypersensitivity and your fear of blowing things up. It's a real thing. And so one thing I want to make sure is that you know that it's real, because so much of a life spent with somebody who's narcissistic in your purview means you get so used to being gaslighted. I want this YouTube channel, I want these videos to be a place where you're not gaslighted and you get a chance to realize, like, yeah, this is real. You are exhausted. And it does mean, and it's something we're going to take on in the future video series, is that you do need to take good care of yourself. The little things you can do, make sure you get, if you can, get some adequate nutrition, make sure you do get the rest you need. Like, you do you the best you can under these circumstances, because I promise you this, you're gonna need the energy. While all these techniques like being mindful and being careful and watching your words and walking on eggshells can spare you the narcissist rage, it still takes a toll on you. And that's ultimately the catch-22 of a relationship with a narcissist. In some ways, no matter what you do, it's really never good for you. How'd you sleep last night? For many of you, I have a feeling the answer might have been okay. Now, you know this scenario well. Let's say it's one night you think about something the narcissist said or did. Their gaslighting, their manipulation, their blame shifting. It gets stuck in your head. Maybe it was a partner blaming you for their cheating. Maybe it was a toxic boss who stole an idea and didn't credit you for your contributions. Maybe it was a toxic mother or father or other family member who continually gets at you with their passive-aggressive barbs and their cruel words. Those things get stuck in your head. And we often see another pattern in narcissistic abuse raise its head, which we've already talked about, which is rumination. That rumination can often happen just as you're about to drift off to sleep. You think about that mistake that so many people make right before they go to sleep. What do? Yeah, they look at their phone. So then you see that one text message or email or social media post, invariably toxic or betraying, and they get stuck in your head. And sleep, after seeing that, is about as likely as a unicorn galloping into your bedroom. But the sleep difficulties don't end there. The more challenging pattern that often arises in narcissistic abuse, it's not the falling asleep, it's not the waking up in the morning, it's the waking up in the middle of the night when the rumination kicks in again. You may play that argument over and over again in your head. You may keep reading that nasty text, hear their comments, ruminate on the gaslighting, and wonder how you can fix it. And you simply cannot eliminate that thought from your head. So you wake up and you stare at the ceiling and it grinds through your head. That middle of the night waking with the rumination in your head may be the most common sleep challenge raised by narcissistic abuse. The other challenge raised by narcissistic abuse, of course, is that it leaves you exhausted. You are mentally depleted, always having to deal with the invalidation, the confusion, and just the unhappiness of being in such a hollow and abusive relationship. It's not a healthy life, and it does deplete you. So you are tired. But the intrusive thoughts and anxiety and confusion mean that now you have exhaustion coupled with interrupted sleep, which is a terribly unhealthy combination and makes it more likely that you're going to have more conflicts in your narcissistic relationship. When people ask me the one thing that you can do that can be a turnaround for your health, it's good sleep. One good uninterrupted night of sleep may be as close to a cure-all or a panacea we have in mental health. And we also know that sleep disturbance is a classical part of many mental illnesses and is a classical part of experiencing narcissistic abuse. So, by virtue of experiencing narcissistic abuse, you have limited access to something that can have myriad benefits for your health. Narcissistic abuse plus lack of sleep, it's a cruel catch-22. And the darker side is that consistent sleep disruption is actually really bad for your health. It can either exacerbate existing health problems you have and perhaps even render you vulnerable to new ones. If you originated from a narcissistic family of origin, so sadly, the sleep difficulties may have been a part of your childhood. Children from narcissistic families are terribly anxious, and that anxiety in children always disrupts their sleep. The invalidation of parents means that childhood fears around sleep and nightmares are minimized and trivialized. The chaos of narcissistic families mean that there can be noise, arguing, and chaos at bedtime. There's no one to really tuck them in and read them a story. The confusion of a narcissistic family means that a child may ruminate upon going to bed wondering, how can I be better? How can I be better? How can I get mommy to notice me? And poor sleep habits in childhood can generalize into poor sleep habits in adulthood. The chaos of narcissistic relationships means that chaos can quite often happen at bedtime. Tension, arguments, rage, and the closer to bedtime that these things happen, the greater the probability that you're going to have sleep difficulties that night. Another pattern that has sometimes been shared with me are from the people who feel compelled to get up very early, even after not getting enough sleep the night before, just to get some peace, to get their time away from the narcissist. The narcissist may still be sleeping, but there may be a real pull to take advantage of the few peaceful moments before the narcissist's negativity punctures your space. And this pattern may also apply on the front end of the night, which with some people saying they will stay up later than the narcissist so they can get their quiet time before bedtime. But when you couple the late bedtime or the early awakening with interrupted sleep, yep, it means you're getting inadequate sleep. So what do? Obviously, you follow the standard advice on sleep hygiene, but that advice can come up a little bit short here. The usual advice is a regular bedtime, a dark room, a cooler temperature, a comfortable bed, not looking at electronics or other blue light devices like TVs ahead of sleep, making sure those blue lights don't pop during the night, avoiding caffeine late in the day, avoiding alcohol, using white noise or other devices to cancel ambient noises needed. That's just sort of sleep hygiene. I'm going to tell you this right now. All the damned white noise in the world isn't going to stop the noises in your head when you're dealing with a narcissistic relationship. So while these are all good tips in general, the bottom line is the frustration of the narcissistic relationship is the issue, not staying up and playing Candy Crush at bedtime. And by the way, guilty. Number 2, be careful about pharmaceuticals as a regular way of getting to sleep. While sleep medications as prescribed by a physician can work in a pinch, regular reliance on them is not good for you. Work with your healthcare provider so you do not become reliant on prescription sleep medicine, maybe in a pinch, but not regularly. Number 3, if you haven't already, go take a look at the rumination video. Use some of the anti-rumination tips as a tool to squelch some of this thinking so it doesn't pour into bedtime and into the middle of the night. Number 4, I'm going to say it again, every single one of these videos, therapy. Talk about what's bothering you. Sometimes just venting, even if you are still in the relationship, can validate you and help you let go of some of it so you can sleep. Number 5, I want you to breathe. Breathing works. Deep breaths, mantras, and there are even apps out there that are supposed to offer some help with breathing and other sleep sounds and routines and just things that lull you into sleep. Maybe check into some of those too. It could just at least be a momentary distraction that helps you sleep. A lot of the usual sleep advice doesn't always work when you are experiencing a narcissistic relationship. In fact, there is interesting workplace research that indicates that a toxic work setting often does its greatest damage to us and our health through our sleep, which means you aren't functioning as well. Obviously, not having to deal with the narcissist would fix your sleep mighty fast, but if that's not an option, You need something else. Sometimes the tried and true techniques to manage a narcissist, realistic expectations, radical acceptance, and not engaging, can at least give you a toolkit to help you push back on the helplessness and rumination of the narcissistic relationship. So, of course, this is when I'm going to say good luck and hopefully good night. And before I let you go, think about that old saying. They say you're never supposed to go to sleep angry. Listen, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you go to bed angry more often than not. So this is why I'm saying a lot of the prevailing wisdom on sleep can be tough when you're going through a narcissistic relationship. But at a minimum, and this is a quick fix, just don't read those text messages and emails an hour before bedtime. Invariably, a narcissist will often not respect the boundaries of time and send you a nasty work email, a nasty text, whatever it is, late at night so you can ruminate over it. Do not look at it. Get an old-fashioned clock if you want to be able to tell the time at night, but do not look at your messagey watch or your phone in the middle of the night to figure out the time. Just that one place is a great place to start. So again, go tonight. Get a good night's sleep. And those of you experiencing narcissistic abuse, drop it in the comments. Let me know the last time you had a good night's sleep. Have any of you ever had self-care be shamed? We live in a world where everyone's like, self-care, self-care. Well, have in your narcissistic relationship, were you taught that was a bad thing? Share your thoughts on that in the comments, because I know somewhere along the line of being in a narcissistic relationship, I was taught that self-care was a bad thing. I personally am not a big fan of the term self-care. It sounds a little bit too much, go to the spa, light candles, take a bath, brief respite, before you have to throw yourself back into some toxic spaces in your life. But when you really use the term right, it's not just spa stuff. Self-care is about being responsive to yourself, giving yourself a break when you're having a tough day, nourishing yourself, and simply just being aware of what you need and giving that to yourself. It may be like taking a break, putting stuff down and saying, you know what, I'm going to take a nap. The loss of self-care is a standard experience for anyone in a narcissistic relationship. And it's unfortunate, because if there was ever a group of people that require self-care, it is people in these kinds of toxic relationships. In a way, self-care would be the only way to survive. So one would wonder, what happens? How do narcissistic relationships erode self-care? First, narcissistic people will shame your self-care, though they take pretty damn good care of themselves. The vast majority of people I have worked with throughout my career, and it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it was, parent, partner, work, other family, have said without exception that if they were caught engaging in self-care, that they were called selfish, self-indulgent, or it was, those things were quietly implied with passive-aggressive remarks like, oh, wow, you must not be working that hard. Do you really have time for that? Or, did you actually get done all the stuff you said you were going to get done? Or, oh, is that really how you're going to spend your money? Or even, wow, is it really any wonder you don't get anything done if you're just sitting around? Whatever dig they get in, narcissistic relationships in general are a place where your needs go to die. Your needs, not theirs. This is really unfortunate if this originates in childhood, because engaging in anything that resembles self-care can feel impossible when you reach adulthood. You may see a parent doing it, but yet everyone else would be shamed for engaging in it. Narcissistic relationships are places where your needs are secondary and even shameful. So to actually do what you need to be and feel healthy, to be responsive to yourself, well, that flies in the face of the premise of the narcissistic relationship. Now, if you find hidden ways of caring for yourself, that could work. But that's not how it's supposed to work. Self-care shouldn't be a shame, like a sort of you, the idea of you sort of taking care of your needs on the sly, as though your needs are somehow shameful, feels like the equivalent of sneaking behind the building and sneaking a cigarette. But the implicit message is the sort of Cinderella of it all. You can go to the ball if you take care of every single thing around here and make our dresses and make sure we look good, and then maybe you can go, but we're going to sabotage you at the end anyhow. That's what self-care pursuits look like in a narcissistic relationship. Only if all of their needs are met, you do everything they say, the house is perfect, the work is perfectly done, everything is just right. Then and only then could you even ponder doing something you need for you. Otherwise, you are being selfish. And even then, they may sabotage what you set up for yourself or the time you need to do what you need. Here's the thing, self-care on a schedule doesn't always work. You don't always know when you're going to need a minute to gather yourself. Sure, it certainly is nice, and it's actually a good thing to schedule something pleasurable. But odds are that that massage isn't always going to fall on the day you need it. And on that day, when you feel invalidated, or you had a negative interaction, or just a bad day, or were really gaslighted, sometimes you need a minute. And that needing a minute is what often gets pathologized in a narcissistic relationship. Doubly awful is that the narcissistic people will always take the time they need for themselves, and then some. I think this idea of self-care as a luxury needs to be halted, and instead, self-care doesn't need to take hours, but it simply may be the few minutes you give yourself after a particularly bad day or after reading a really uncomfortable email. The night you opt to not cook or let the laundry go so you can get some rest. It's recognizing that you don't need to be superhuman. And sometimes you just have human needs. Narcissistic relationships push us to be perfectionistic robots. The idea that maybe there is a point of enough where we will get it right and they'll be okay with us and then we can breathe. That moment doesn't exist, and there's no such thing as perfect, and we are not robots. We are people who, in many cases, after years of toxic relationships, need a minute more than anyone else to realign, to fall out of negative mindsets, to be kind to ourselves. The shaming of self-care over the course of a narcissistic relationship can mean that a person can get very burned out and put themselves at risk for depression or physical health issues. So many people want the humanity of the narcissistic person to come out, for them to wake up one day and want us to engage in self-care or support our self-care. It typically doesn't happen. But even more terribly, a legacy is that people in these relationships never really learn how to do it for themselves. This isn't about resorts, like I said, and candlelit bathtubs. This is about survival, about being responsive to your own fatigue, your own emotions and experiences. There is no enough with them. And if you remain in one of these relationships, you just have to recognize that what you do for yourself will be critiqued and shamed. And if you decide to leave one of these relationships, recognize that learning self-care in a meaningful, responsive way will actually not be that easy. In early days, you may feel guilty when you engage in self-care. The internalized voice of the narcissistic person in your life still ringing through, especially if they're still in your life. But over time, just as you wouldn't walk on a broken leg or drive on a flat tire, you would fix those things first. It's the same with us. Sometimes we as people, human beings, need a minute. The guilt, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. But tolerate it as you try to get to the other side and give yourself what you need, even if it is just a minute. Self-care is really, really complicated, and it's a very two-sided, sort of two sides out of the same mouth. Narcissistic people make sure they've got their golf game scheduled, and they're this scheduled, and they're that scheduled. But because other human beings are often viewed as functionaries in their lives, you would be quite surprised if your coffee maker walked off the counter and decided to go off to get a massage and get its hair done. It's a coffee maker. Its job is to make your coffee. It's a thing. Well, when you recognize that that's how the narcissistic person views you, and would almost recognize with the same absurdity, well, what are you doing just walking off and taking care of yourself? Either you will be looked at in a perplexed manner, or even when you take those little moments for yourself, feet up, taking a moment, and having that shamed, it can be really, really difficult to give yourself the time and space to actually do this for yourself without feeling guilty. But it's a really, really important thing to learn as part of your healings. So I'm going to put this out there as a question. You can put it in the comments, and I'll see if I answer it to your satisfaction on this video. And I'm sure many of you have had this happen, so if that's the case, jump that into the comments too, which is, why do narcissists try to ruin the big days in our lives? And have you ever had that happen? You have a narcissist in your life and they manage to ruin those big important days. Has or have the difficult narcissist or narcissists in your life ever thrown a tantrum? I don't know, during your birthday dinner or other get-together? Have they left a work event that you were being honored at early? Did they become rageful at a family wedding? Did that narcissistic person in your life start raising a perpetual fight you keep having on a day you need to give a big business presentation or have a job interview, and it's a couple of hours before? Has your narcissist ever had a word salad meltdown right before you leave on a business trip or on some long-awaited high-stakes trip of some kind or some other kind of, maybe even a presentation or something at work? This idea of the narcissist tantruming and really casting a pall over these important days for you is a very common dynamic. I have heard from people who said that narcissists broke up with them on the day before they were to have, or on the day of, a major life event, really important final exams, or starting new jobs. What is all of this about? Why do they do this? Well, there's a few things happening here when they throw these big person tantrums on these important days. Number one, they don't like other people getting attention. Remember, it has to be all validation all the time for them. So other people's days, watching other people get the birthday cake and the presents and the attention and the toasts, it's just almost too much for them. They struggle watching brides and grooms being the centers of attention on their day. They struggle with people getting awards, especially when those people aren't them. They don't like it. It pings their insecurities. And if they are already used to manipulating and getting away with their usual stuff, their usual gaslighty, kind of nasty stuff they do with you, that idea of you getting propped up again and getting good adulation and validation and all of that, they don't like that happening. Kind of messes up the power balance for them, so they spoil it. Number two, they're afraid of abandonment. Remember that the core issue in narcissism is insecurity. So if it's a job interview or graduation or some other big event in your life which you want to succeed at, or which you have succeeded at, or which may lead you to sort of level up in your life, that means that their fear is that, yeah, you may leave them. Yep. That fear does lurk for them. But do not ever try to engage them in a discussion about their fear of abandonment. It is unconscious and it is unprocessed for them. So if you do try to attempt to do the empathic, compassionate thing and attempt to assuage their fears and say, oh, honey, I love you. I'd never, ever leave you. Don't you worry about that. They will lash out with rage, anger, and contempt. Remember, people who are narcissistic have shame at their own vulnerability. And you bringing up the idea that there even is that vulnerability in them will activate it. Number three, they don't want to lose control of the narrative. Gaslighting works best with an isolated target. Same with manipulation, control. All of these dynamics work best when the target is isolated. So that means an event that would be about you, celebrating you, it strengthens you. And you stronger diminishes their control over you. When other people are offering you love, congratulations, or that they show that, look at this challenge you faced up to, look at your success, they're celebrating you. That is not in line with the narcissist narrative of you being less than them. And basically, they're afraid you're going to get too big for your britches. Well, you should be too big for your britches. Number 4, narcissistic individuals are very prone to jealousy. Now, jealousy is a universal human emotion, but it's an emotion they live in. They're jealous and covetous of what other people have. And you're being recognized or succeeding, that evokes that jealousy, that envy, and then they tantrum because you got something that they want, or honestly, someone else may have something that they want. So basically, what do? They spoil it. They spoil your event. And what's interesting is that this may not be fully conscious for them. Like all personality dynamics, narcissism quite often impacts behavior under the radar. And because narcissists have very little insight and self-reflection on their own behavior to start with, they just do stuff and they don't even quite, it just doesn't even make sense. The unprocessed threat of you having a moment, good moment, means that they throw a tantrum. It's a little bit like a toddler throwing a tantrum when his parents are about to head out on a night out. Kind of casts a pall over their night. That's what 3-year-olds do. It's not what 43-year-olds are supposed to do. So having a conversation with them is meaningless, just like with the 3-year-old. If you decide to stay in this relationship, you need to prepare for meltdowns because they're going to be a regular event, and you need to have contingency plans in place because they are going to try to ruin or cast a pall over these important days for you. This can also be understood by understanding the flip side. More than a few people have had the experience that the narcissist actually soothed them when things went wrong. Oh, hey, baby, don't worry. I got you. It didn't work out. Don't worry about it. I can take care of things. I got your back. Or, screw those people if they didn't want you for that better job. It's their loss. Or let's say some event you did have, your birthday party or some other event goes sideways, it rains or things don't go the way you wanted or something else goes wrong. All of a sudden they'll become a fan. They'll criticize the people on the other side. I can't even believe that company screwed it up. You deserved a good birthday party. You may even feel soothed by what they're saying, like, maybe this whole thing going wrong was a blessing. It's drawing me and my narcissistic person, or my family member, my partner, whoever, closer together. Not so much. You wouldn't feel so good to know that it's very likely that they're relieved. Your thing going wrong means no threat. They might even try to get a little gaslighted barb or two in there. They might say, it's just as well. You know what? That job was just a little above your level now because you're going to be great at that job someday. But maybe this wasn't the time. That constant, always in the back of your mind that you hear from them, maybe you just aren't good enough. Just getting ground into your head. Don't fall for it. It's a sort of failure Hoover. Didn't work out for you, I'll take care of you. No need to take it on head on with them. They're not going to understand it, but understand this dynamic so you aren't influenced by it. And also, do not let their sort of soothing when you fail dissuade you from continuing to live your life. Keep reaching for what you want, despite what the narcissist says in the face of something not working out in your life. You are capable, even if they don't want you to be. The last thing they want you to do is to keep reaching higher and higher. So the next time the narcissistic person in your life argues with you or throws a tantrum before a big presentation, tantrums before a birthday dinner, or breaks up with you before a job interview, be prepared, as what they do, and go out there and make it happen anyhow. And if you don't like it, radical acceptance. This will happen. These tantrums and blow-ups will happen at holidays and other anniversary dates, birthdays, job events, basically anything that's not about them. If you don't like it, it ain't going to change. So make your decisions accordingly. And the other way to do this is have the realistic expectations. If you really do have a big day coming, big presentation, big interview, you might want to keep it to yourself. Then they might think it's just a regular day for you, and you might then be protected from the distraction of them trying to do something that's distracting you from doing well, and them throwing their tantrum and throwing you off your game. So Let us know in the comments. Has that ever happened to you? That the narcissistic person in your life more than once has managed to sort of mess up something that was important to you in your life by throwing some sort of rageful kind of tantrum? Drop it in the comments. Thanks again.